Hello everybody and welcome to LP Podcast. Today I have a special guest, Salah Mostafa. He is the head of legal of Middle East and Africa in Novartis for innovative medicines. He is dual qualified lawyer in the Egypt and the UK. And today we discuss the crisis leadership. Hello, Salah. Thanks for joining. And let's discuss today about crisis leadership.
Dr. Ludmila, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to our discussion.
Okay, so let's start with basic definitions. What is crisis? What do we understand by crisis?
Listen, I'll try to avoid COVID-19 because everyone's trying to talk about COVID-19, although it is the ultimate crisis. But it is a material interruption in a flow of a business, right? Because we need to focus on the business dynamics. So you've got dynamics, a flow that got materially interrupted. And that can happen because of a natural disaster, can happen because, industrial action, civil, commotions, or it can, whatever happens that disrupts the norm, whatever we put ourselves into, this is the norm, and the predictability of our day-to-day routine at business or during life, that forms a crisis of sorts.
So, and from your point of view, how soon we can actually realize that we are in crisis after it actually has happened?
It's a very good question. I think you're putting your hands on a very important topic. Is some people do not realize that they are in crisis, and there will be some companies in denial of having a crisis. So it depends on the magnitude, really. I think the most dangerous ones are the ones that creep up gradually. And we've seen so many examples in the business world where, for example, disruption by technology. Like some companies would actually not realize that they're in crisis because they haven't evolved. And the rule in business is evolve or die. So and you don't start realizing that there's crisis without having an entrepreneurial mindset in your company. So, you need to, and we get to talk about that. I think we should talk about, the different aspects of how to prepare. But it depends really on the situation, the magnitude, the type of crisis. It's all about having the fitness and the agility to realize, and having the right antennas within the leadership team and the collective body of employees to realize what's happening.
But if, for example, company is in the denial stage, what they can do, or maybe how they can basically quickly realize that they're actually in a crisis, that they can start taking necessary actions now and not to wait until the situation further evolves.
Yeah, so I think this is a good entry point to talk about culture. You don't prepare for crisis during crisis. You would prepare for crisis throughout your journey as a business. So you start by the first thing, define the culture that you would like to have. That the culture, is it a culture that is full of trust? Is it a culture that encourages free thinking? Do we have empowered employees who can come forward and talk? Because usually it's the front lines who will pick up the signs before the higher management. So have you empowered these people? Have you given them the right channels, the right comfort to come forward and talk? And I'm not talking only about surveys, because I think it depends on the culture. I think let's talk about emerging markets. A lot of emerging markets country, the culture does not encourage people coming forward for whatever reason, whether it's religious background, whether it's respect for the elders, whether it's so many reasons. And this has to be practiced. This has to be things like, when failure happens, how did they deal with failure? Where was failure tolerated and taken as an opportunity to grow, or was whoever responsible for failure, put under the spot and not corrected? It depends, of course, on the we're not talking about illegal or anything that's that breaks the laws or regulations, but we're talking about genuine mistakes, and that's how you grow. And the mindset should always be never waste a good crisis. A crisis comes with a lot of risks and disruption, but really comes with a lot of opportunities, as we will talk about it in a bit.
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting topic you mentioned, that risks come together with opportunities. Because I read recently one article, and it says that in Chinese language, the risk and opportunities is the same character in Chinese language. It's exactly the same. It's basically, It depends how you look on the situation, because it depends on your perspective. It's exactly the same, the risk and opportunities. They just go side by side.
I didn't know that. It's great to hear that. Maybe that's what's helping them get through the current crisis now. And again, I think the social structure there versus other countries versus other cultures is showing the difference in how you deal with a big crisis on a scale. But then once you realize, that once you've empowered the culture, you've opened the doors, you've put in place a good feel about, you've got employees you're looking after who feel nurtured by their managers. I think once you get to that point, you should start working on your facts, because the initial impact, you said, one of the, classic reactions would be denial. But once you go past that, the usual 4 stages of grief, you start to digest it, and in order to digest and be able to work and work through the crisis, first thing is to get the facts right, and get as much as you can in terms of insights from your industry, from your competitors, and then start to formulate a position. And it really depends on the industry. But also, one important fact that we need to acknowledge is that in crisis mode, you might not have all the information and the facts. So there will be a level of discomfort that you need to be comfortable with to start working on a solution. And like now, look at what's happening now in the world. It's everyone's trying, every industry, they're trying to come up with solutions. Even governments are stuck in, which position? Shall we go the Swedish way? Shall we go the Chinese way? And I don't think there's one size that fits all. And every factual setup will differ depending on the industry, the situation, the country, so many factors. So there has to be this element of, subjectivity and gut feel that would have been nurtured through the culture, right? If you have the right culture, people come and push for ideas, really you will get to somewhere that's probably in the right direction. And you have to forgive yourself if you make a few bad calls, because you have to have calls, right? You have to make a call at some point, and there will be a level of discomfort of not knowing everything and not having the full picture, especially if it's an evolving crisis.
Yeah, there are lots of unknown unknowns during the crisis, basically, which you cannot even predict. And in this case, when leaders don't have the full picture and don't have actually all the information available to take a decision, what is the decision process should be undertaken during the crisis? How leaders need to make their decision during these situations?
So you have to really draw a balance between democratizing the process, and picking the right team. So you need to have the right team, and you have to have the balance. So you need the innovators. Hopefully you would have had this in your team to start with. The innovators, the dreamers, those who will see the problems. Like I can talk about myself as a lawyer, or our compliance colleagues, they know what can go wrong. And then you start to, find the middle way between, how can you address this in an innovative way versus how to balance it against risks. So the only way to get to that is to assemble a team of hopefully who would have been motivated and nurtured employees who would really put their heart into this. And of course you need to put like now I think every company has that now. You have a task force that allows for cross-pollination of ideas, and that becomes a bit of a problem in companies that has a matrix structure, because if you have different divisions, that can really stifle correct decision making. And again, you don't wait for the crisis. Because it could be an opportunity to bring everyone together. I've worked in companies and seen companies where divisions were not, were competing or were not in good relations. And the crisis will either flesh that out, and then they will get stifled even more, or they would put their differences aside and start to pull together. So it's the team structure, it's the governance. It's also allowing, as we were saying, the front lines to come up with ideas. Again, let's talk about my industry that I'm working in now, which is the pharmaceuticals. The front line is in the, medical representatives who are trying to reach out to the healthcare professionals. They're all overwhelmed by what's happening. So how can you communicate with them? So you kind of you want to balance between, okay, let's borrow a few ideas from our colleagues in China. Let's see because they were the first people to deal with this. But knowing that the structure, the culture, context, and for example, in terms of digital platforms, China has WeChat, and everything is done through WeChat. Whereas now we're thinking about other countries where you have the full array of options. Which platform are you going to choose? Can you afford to say, well, this is what they did in China, so this is what we're going to do in the UAE? You can't do that. So there has to be an element of empowerment for the front lines, so that they can come up and feed back to the senior management ideas from what they're seeing. And a lot of great examples throughout crisis where some genius junior person comes up, gets an epiphany, and comes up with a good idea. If you don't have that culture of someone saying, hey, and they have the confidence that they will be listened to, then you're missing out on opportunity. So that's the very rough sketch of how you should deal with crisis. And then communicating. Now most companies are doing check-ins, and I think that's very helpful. Because you just check in, how are you guys, what's going on, what's new, is there anything you would share with us? And then you start to allow for ideas to flow. And if there's a block, and probably you should talk about that as well, because you might get a block of good ideas. I personally do ethical lobbying, so I kind of you have to be org savvy and have a map of who's who are the influencers, and who are the people that you need really to get them to buy into your idea. And again, that you should have nurtured that relationship during peace times, so that when there is war or crisis, this is where you can leverage these relationships.
So, from leader point of view, they need to give more freedom, as you said, for maybe not freedom. I don't know, maybe to delegate, or maybe more listen to the front line, to put more attention. But at the same time, when you form a crisis type task force, you need as a leader maybe to focus on the strengths of their each employee. So, and
Absolutely.
pick up particular these strengths which you need, which really crucial during this period, and basically which can help you to get out of crisis. But at the same time, sometimes during a crisis, because it's like an emergency and you don't have all of the facts as a leader, so what is starting happening that people quickly jump into quickly making the decision. They're making decisions very fast without like looking at all the facts. Because okay, we're in an emergency situation, we need to do something quicker, we need to do something fast. What do you think from your point of view is a good approach, or maybe during the crisis the decision-making process need to slow down a little bit?
Yes. Listen, I mean, it's called situational leadership, right? I mean, you can't have the same style during crisis versus during prosperity. And I think it's very hard to judge. Of course, the first initial step would be, let's pause and get the facts and digest. As long as that doesn't take a long time, because there might be, like, look at the industries that are suffering, like airlines, some like hospitality, restaurants. There is a situational leadership style that has to adapt to the situation. You pause, but then also you don't want to pause too much. So and this is where the culture that I was talking about comes into play. But there will come a point where you've paused, you've assembled the team, you've gathered ideas, but there will come a point where you really have to make a decision. And as a leader during a crisis, you have to shift very smartly between empowerment, but also once you're comfortable enough with your gut feeling and then you move to action. So it's really a very fine balance, and you have to have very savvy leaders to understand when to move, when to pause, what to digest. And again, the culture, if it's entrepreneurial, in the sense that, you know what, let's test ideas, let's see if that works. If it doesn't work, we move to the next one. That's a very good way of doing it. So, the fail fast, learn fast, entrepreneurial setup. That's definitely the way to deal with crisis. Keep flexibility, but also keep pushing for ideas.
There's also, once we started talking about a different type of leadership in a crisis, there are several discussions now in the internet, actually, that during crisis, there are two options which people are discussing. The first one, it should be more like autocratic leadership. And at the same time, another point of view, it should be servant leadership applied during this time. What is your point of view? Maybe you can come up with something third option for this type.
Listen, I will always go back to the same point of culture. If you have obedient employees that you've been hiring to say yes to you, you can't suddenly shift gears and turn them into free thinkers. You reap what you sow. If you've been doing business in a particular way, I think during crisis it would be very difficult to shift gears. So a company that has the culture of openness, I think you can afford, because you've already, those channels have been unclogged already, so they're working. And that's the emphasis that I think we should all focus on. You don't prepare for crisis during crisis. You should be preparing for crisis throughout your business. That's why we have business continuity plans. This is why we have risk. And let me talk a bit about risk. I think we're all moving towards an enterprise risk management system across. And we had interesting discussions about who is the risk owner. So would you appoint the functional leads as risk owners? Or would you make the GM and people who are running in the front lines, and more crucially, middle management, because this is the riskiest place of like, because they'll be minding their own business, they are training the juniors, and then they'll become senior. So how would you go about risk? And I think what we said is like the risk owner should be the person who's like facing, the customers, the person who's the GM, the person who's responsible for. Because if you appoint a lawyer, say you're responsible for these, mentally that shifts the burden of ownership to someone else. Because like, he's the risk owner, I don't have to worry about that. And that's really a dangerous way of looking at risk. So authoritarian or not, it depends. If you were really like, again, let's use the concept of China. China has one ruling party, has like, there's one view disseminated downwards. They can afford to go authoritarian, and the population is used to that. Whereas in the US or in Europe, you ask people to stay, maybe people will not stay at home. It's a different culture. You have your freedoms, you have your view, you're a free thinker. So how are you going to deal with that? And that's how we're seeing the differences between how countries are dealing with the lockdown. You have to look at your culture and make it like a homegrown solution. So if you're authoritarian, you might as well continue being authoritarian, because now is not the time to be democratic. If you are democratic, you open the doors to listen up to a few ideas. Hopefully something will come up, and then you start implementing. Maybe after you listen, you move into authoritarian. Let's do this now. Here's the plan. Let's revisit every week or every two, depending on the cycle.
So, but at the same time, also when leaders apply different type of leadership, but their personal insight is also under pressure. They also have, crisis itself, there's not only their need to manage the team, the organization, they also need to manage themselves. Because crisis, it affects them on a personal basis. They also feel fear, maybe anxiety or uncertainty. How on a personal basis leadership should deal with this?
They should have trusted advisors, really. Like, you should have those around you. You need to, like everyone, leader is a human, they need a support system. Support system is someone from your family, someone who would like come and tell it to you in your face that, you need to take it easy. And I think there is time for reflection. During crisis, the problem is it will be bang on every day. There's something new happening and you have to be on top of it.
Yes.
If you don't allow for a bit of introspection, a bit of like, let's sit and relax and, I don't know, meditate, whatever works for whoever person, it depends on your style. But I think the last, you cannot afford as a leader to be weak at the time. You can't be weak. You just have to be mentally agile and look after yourself, whether it's like you go for a run, you play games, whatever it is, listen to music. But and then you have your trusted advisors and this comes over years. It can come in so many forms. Whoever is within your circle of trust, you need to always consult and seek insights from other leaders. People don't reach out sometimes. Like, I'll give you an example now. The paradigm shift that needs to happen now in so many industries. Antitrust considerations aside, but I think this is a time for augmentation, not fragmentation, because you've got your customers who are now trying to get value and trying to understand and figure out, whatever your industry is, how to overcome this. And you as a business, you're wired always to compete and make money, right? But there is a moment where you have to go and sit with the industry. Guys, how are we going to deal with this together? Because we're in this together. If each one of us, things where we can really cooperate, like, virtual platforms, whatever it is that you can do, let's do it together. And that gives you this sense of camaraderie, sense of, you're not alone. So you balance between where you need to compete, but where you need to survive to start with and keep your customers. So that's another aspect. To be honest, we've been pushing for that in our industry. because we need to communicate with the doctors, right? And then make sure the doctors, to ease the pressure on the healthcare system, you want to come up with telemedicine solutions. Would you go alone or would you go to the ministries of health and say, guys, we can help you build up the platforms to do capacity building, e-prescriptions? Are we going to use drones to deliver in rural areas? There's so many ideas that come up as an industry, and then you can differentiate after this. It's a reputational issue as well, to keep your industry as part of the solution. And if you don't coordinate, you might create fragmentation that then will have negative implications in the future.
Yeah, so in this case, we need to talk more about cooperation rather than competition. And but at which point, and basically how, we can be comfortable, or we can become comfortable in a crisis or in a chaos? How we can feel comfortable so we can take away this pressure and to think clearly what we can do and how we can do this. How we can do, basically, how we can proceed further.
Listen, I mean, especially if you're in emerging markets, crisis is a mode, right? I mean, it is a lifestyle. If you were in the Middle East in the last 10 years, 20 years, there would have been the Iraq War. There was, before that, the Iran-Iraq War. There was the crisis of the financial crisis hit everyone. And then you had the Arab Spring, and then you had the rise of terrorist organizations. So you're I think at some point, those who especially come from out a particular region, or the region is not is struck by disaster all the time, then you can actually become more comfortable with things like that. So it's you need to have skin in the game. And that's another thing that we've been trying to do is bring managers from different regions with that kind of profile. Have they been under pressure? Did they go through audit? How hard? Was there an investigation and they turned it around? Was it a business? So you need to have a circulation of those talents who are comfortable with being uncomfortable. And to be honest, I mean, a crisis is an uncomfortable situation. You can never get to a point where you should never get relaxed about it. You always have to be on your toes. And you need to be, and that's why I was talking about the entrepreneurial spirit that you need to have in the place. That's the best thing. Entrepreneurs are very good at that, and that's why they start. You hear all those stories Jack Ma, whatever you say. Oh, this guy succeeded after he failed in 100 startups, and then there was Alibaba was the breakthrough. So it's about having the entrepreneur mindset of let's test. And I really, you have this whole, again, it comes from the culture. Let's talk about the Middle East. There is sometimes this pressure that people should come up with solutions. That's so 1990s. It doesn't work this way because the world is changing. Yeah. There was a time where, after the Industrial Revolution and then before the technology outbreak that we have now, yes, maybe you had the same dynamics across the world. You had different powers and there was a balance. Now, what's the future? It's anyone's guess. And of course, there is pain that comes with growth, pain that comes with trying new things. And you have to become comfortable with discomfort and getting the right people in place. And never get relaxed. You always have to be on your toes. I'll tell you, for example, this crisis started. Of course, the first thing we looked at was our day-to-day business. Yeah. But 2-3 weeks down the line, when we started to digest, ideas started to emerge. Okay, what would the world look like after this? What will our stakeholders expect in terms of value? So now the thinking started to evolve about, okay, well, these people will not want to do things the way they have been done. In some aspects, of course, a lot of aspects will go back, but certain aspects will change. So what is the intervention that we can do after this is over? And this shows agility and high level of mental fitness.
Yeah, that's interesting topic. And
Yeah.
I think the last questions might have in this discussion is, what should be the planning horizon? How far actually we need to plan the development of our business and maybe exit from the crisis and the further functioning of the economy, of the business in general, of the organization?
Yeah, that follows from the last point that we're talking about. It's you really need to, like, assess, because there are burning platforms, right? I mean, the burning platforms will always have to come first. You have to keep the cycle. You have to keep the flow as much, because that's how you keep things going. So there has to be a balance. So you have a group that is in crisis mode. Let's jump into this. Let's deal with the immediate problems. But at the same time, as I was telling you, your mind will always be at the next steps. Your mind will always be thinking about, okay, what's next? What's next it will depend so much on stabilization. So your planning horizon, unfortunately, initially will have to be very short term, just to extinguish the fires. And you need to have an open mind to how the situation evolves, how this crisis is unfolding, and then from that you start to plan your other horizon. But the key learnings you get is your immediate problems, your immediate burning platforms, and the learnings that you get out there, because a lot of learnings will come out during your attempt to extinguish the fire. And that should feed into that loop of okay, let's bring our heads together about next steps. There will be tough decisions that have to be made. You will need as a business always to continue as a going concern. How are you going to balance that? How can you help the society? How can you give back to the society as well? There's a whole aspect of what can we do to alleviate the crisis on my immediate stakeholders. So there's no specific horizon. The horizon will pretty much depend. The faster you don't deny, you digest, and you start to have a plan, the faster you can have a bigger horizon, as you should. Because so again, as we started, you either evolve or die. This is an opportunity to learn. This is an opportunity maybe to find holes in the culture and address them. This is an opportunity for situation leaders to rise and stretch themselves and really do great things. And the more agile you are, the more open to ideas, I think the more you get to the point of the longer horizon as opposed to the short term. I mean, short term is a problem as it is, right? I mean, to be honest, without crisis or not, you have a GM who comes into a company, his term is 2 to 3 years, right? And there are tough decisions that have to be done for the long-term sustainability of the business. A lot of managers, not even during crisis, will want to disrupt things, will want to rock the boat. If you have a dysfunctional relationship with one of your business partners, but things are moving, money is coming, but you know that it will at some point crack. At some point you are probably giving too much power to your counterparty, and it's not balanced anymore. You need to have people who will take those tough decisions. So as it is, I think the concept of you come at how can I meet the targets, and how headquarters is telling me these are your targets, and then you go back and you say I can't meet those targets, then you get sacked. So they will do whatever to get. It's why would I be the one who's disrupting anything if it's, and you hear that, if it ain't broken, why fix it? And you're just yes and no. It depends on the situation, and you should never sacrifice the long-term viability at the altar of the immediate needs and getting the numbers. So I think that's also a bit of a humbling situation. Again, do you rock the boat all the time? Of course not, because there's a lot at stake. But this behavior was already, before being in crisis, has been, we need the numbers, the GM will come short term and will go. So that's...
I think this actually mistake which many organizations are currently doing during the crisis, because they want to see more immediate actions, immediate effects now, and sometimes, okay, in the long term we'll deal with this, okay, it affects our long-term goals, our long-term achievements, but we need to deal with the situation now, and in the long term we have more time actually how to manage it. And what is actually a result in this as maybe some of the damage is very difficult to repair afterwards in the long term, which basically fit with these immediate decisions.
Absolutely. And to be honest, the key word here is decency. Be decent to your employees, be decent to your customers, act with generosity where you can. It will take you a long way, as opposed to doing a P&L exercise, this has always been said, employees are put on the liability side, not on the asset side. So that really lends, from an accountant perspective, people start firing. Whereas you need to start thinking about, okay, what are other measures that I can take to minimize the damage for my people? How can I do that? Customers, all of that. This is like decency and not really being stuck on numbers. Because listen, a business plan, anyone who made a business plan, let's say in December 2019, was thinking, they had a snapshot of the world at that moment in time. That world does not exist anymore. So you cannot
valid anymore.
Plan. It's not valid. So for example, you're not making sales, but you're making savings. Are you going to use those savings to try and keep the business afloat and keep as many people, as going concern with the business? Tough calls, but generosity, decency, where you can afford it, just do it.
Yeah, absolutely right. And the last, what would you recommend to the leaders and all actually people working in organizations, or maybe generally, what do you recommend to do during the crisis? What will be your recommendations for them?
If you already don't have a circle of trust, get yourself a circle of trust. Start communicating. Look after yourself. Of course, you don't want to be burnt out. Yes, there will be a lot of sleepless nights, but if you don't stay strong, if the team around you feel that you are weak or you are disoriented, you're actually risking the entire organization. So get your trusted advisors and be don't be too harsh on yourself, because you will make mistakes as a leader. It's anyone's call. People will start to think about different ways. And it's an opportunity now to start to, if not already in the culture, now is a good time to start improving the culture and getting the front lines involved in the decision making.
Great. Thank you very much. I think it was very useful, very interesting conversation. Thanks a lot, and thank you for participating in this conversation.
Thanks again for having me, Dr. Ludmila.
That was all about crisis leadership. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it interesting for you, and stay tuned for the next episode, and see you soon.